Well, good morning and welcome back to the Money Advantage podcast. This is Rachel Marshall, Bruce Wehner, and Becca Wilhite. We have new faces that we're bringing into the conversation on a more regular basis. So you've seen Becca several times. I'm really excited to be able to talk with you both today about your insights and feedback and great things that are coming out of the Nelson Nash Institute. I know you guys are both we just debated this word here, but fresh off of the think tank from 2025 last week. And so I love to be able to find out what's going on there. I was not able to travel to the think tank this year. I've actually never attended in person, and I really hope to be able to do so at some point soon. And I just love to hear the mission of the Nelson Nash Institute and just how they're continuing to not only keep Nelson's vision alive, but be able to be relevant and figure out how to navigate the same concepts that are historically true and work in today's environment. And so I'm just excited to hear all of the things that happened through the think tank. So can Bruce, can you just give kind of a brief overview of what the think tank is and who can attend before we dive in and get started?
Yeah, great question. The original think tank, I believe, was somewhere around 2003, which was about 3 years after Nelson wrote his original book. And Nelson was a person that was much like, Jesus Christ. He was just trying to get the message out to whoever would hear him. And the original think tank only had about 12 participants. And yet, knowing Nelson the way I knew him, he probably went over his program just like he would have done if there was 1,000 people there that particular day. And so the original mission was just to help people understand what was going on, because as Nelson always said, if you know what's going on, you'll know what to do. And it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then more people that were in the industry um, understood what Nelson was now doing and started to participate and actually wanted to partner. And that was probably around just a few years later, 2005 or so. And then it got to be what I would call the Wild West of infinite banking. And so then what Nelson thought was he wanted to keep the message pure. So he continued to try to tell people that, this is if we take the concept and we start having little offshoots that you put your own little spin on, he was afraid that it would be confusing in the marketplace. And I think it is confusing in the marketplace to this day, because whatever your people call it, they're called like accelerated banking or um, infinite wealth systems. It's goes on and on and on, and people have good intentions, but they um, they really are just causing confusion. And so part of the Nelson Nash Institute wanting to have the think tank is to actually do an educational process for the people so that they actually keep the message simple. We actually had a presentation that was called "Do Simple Better,"
Mm.
and the other theme I think is there's no reason to sensationalize the concept. The concept is just a place that you would take over the banking function in your own life instead of using a bank. There's really no difference in what you're normally doing. And so, but what happens is the complexity that is brought on by different ways of saying something, or the complexity of people not saying the key words and phrases properly, then it causes doubt in people's minds. And Rachel, I'll give you one that's one of my personal pet peeves is when a person says that you are going to fund your policy by making a deposit, and because people don't want to say premium, because people think that if you say premium, then people are going to, shut you off. I don't think people give people enough credit that they understand that this is not actually a deposit into a bank. It's actually a premium into life insurance. And then they say you make your deposit and then you immediately borrow that deposit out. So they're talking about taking the money out and then you go spend it on something else or reduce debt. And the normal consumer is smart enough to say, well, that doesn't make any sense because why would I do that then? Why would I put it in and just take it right back out? And I understand why the consumer's, confused because you cannot get a return in one place and then take that same money out and go try to eliminate debt or get an investment return someplace else. And so what they should be saying is you're borrowing against. So these are the kind of things that the think tank helps authorized practitioners actually clean up their language, including Becca, myself, you, Rachel. We've all gotten sloppy with our language at times, and we're all trying to get better at the messaging to do simple better. And if you do simple better, then we believe it'll bring clarity to most consumers and they will be able to move forward on the concept. So then in 2013, the practitioners program was brought about to hold people accountable to the concept because Nelson has intellectual property rights on becoming your own banker, on the infinite banking concept, trademark rights on his book, on his logos, so on and so forth. And people were using this out in the marketplace without crediting Nelson or without financial compensation. And we're all free market people. We all want people to make as much money as possible, but we also want them not to uh, impede on those trademarks and on that intellectual property. Um, I I've had this conversation with a couple of people. Well, it's not that big. Why do you guys care? Because more people are actually getting the message out. Well, there's two reasons you care. Is first of all, we do have contract intellectual property and trademark laws in the United States. If you came up with something yourself and somebody else was actually using your intellectual property or your trademark, you wouldn't be happy with it and because you have potential of lost revenue. But the Nelson Nash Institute does have an abundance mindset. Mostly, it's not that. Mostly, it's that we want to be able to hold people accountable for this confusion that they may be causing.
Mhm.
Well, when you become an authorized practitioner and you sign an agreement, you agree to actually to use the concept in the way that it was actually best for, well, that it is best for the consumer. So that helps the institute police the phrasing, the designs, the way that any organization works. And so that's kind of a, maybe it wasn't such a brief history, but it was kind of a history of why we attend all the time and what the messaging is from the Nelson Nash Institute at the think tank.
Bruce, I think a couple things that are really coming to mind as you're sharing this that I know we relate Nelson Nash and becoming your own banker to the Bible in a lot of ways, and there's really good reason for that. But I'm really drawn to the idea that you're talking about the purity of the original system and the reason why we need to dig deep into understanding that and clarifying that and be in a position of being students of the original text. And it's the same with your faith. If you're studying the word and you're wanting to understand the beauty of scripture and you're wanting to understand all of the truth that's written into the pages of scripture, it's more important to discover the truth than it is to invent copycat or invent something that's easier to digest because scripture, the Bible, is really similar to that. There's things that are hard to understand. They might be a little bit difficult, but they're true. And when they're true, the truth is what sets you free. And so, anyway, so just
But
the
can I piggyback on that? Because I
Yeah,
think it's all right to say something to the effect that your premium is would be similar to a deposit in the bank.
because it's an analogy.
Right. And maybe that way the person kind of can then click on that. So I don't think there's anything wrong with putting your own spin on something as long as you're doing a if you if you believe or you understand this, then it acts like this, the original. So that because not everybody does learn the same way. And I attempt to do that, but I pray to God that I'm always saying this is what they mean, or this is what Nelson meant when he said this. You may think of it like this, and
Hmm.
maybe that helps bring clarity. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you give. I don't want to use the word homage, but as long as you stay with the original concept and you explain the whatever you're trying to help the person understand related to, the non-sensationalized part of the infinite banking concept.
I love this idea that the more that we can really understand rather than prop up something that feels good or sounds better or is newfangled, but the more that we can really go back to true principles, things that work, true understanding, and be students of this thing that really can provide so much traction, so much advantage, so much positive strength in our financial life, I think we will all be better by being that student. And so, thank you guys both for attending the think tank. I love what you said that it was for the people. Bruce, I want you to clarify just a little bit before we kind of dig in. You mentioned the people. So there's authorized practitioners, which are people who are like us, all three of us here on this call with, or on this program, on this podcast, are authorized practitioners with the Nelson Nash Institute. So there are people who are able to represent infinite banking and lead people through an understanding of that. There's also other people who are attending the think tanks that are not authorized practitioners. Can you just speak to that real quickly as well?
Yeah. So there's only really three types of people that can attend the think tank. One is authorized practitioners have, as long as they're in good standing, they have unfettered asset access to attend the. Number two is people that are in the student um, program to become an authorized practitioner. So, and then the final one, which is smaller, but it's getting bigger. And let's just say that myself being on the Nelson Nash Advisory Board, we wrestle with this next group of people every year. And that is the general public who is a guest of an authorized practitioner. Now, normally, well, from my experience, the guest of an authorized practitioner many times is a client of that practitioner, and that client wants to know if they should become a authorized practitioner. In other words, get into the industry. Oftentimes, that's the case. Um, some of them are just clients, and they just want to dive into it more deeply. But I would say, and now this is totally anecdotal, but I think it's probably close to 90% are people that are looking to get in the industry. And the reason that we sometimes um, worry about are we doing them a service is because there's a lot of information. Um, there is a lot of what I would call more sensitive information that could be debated in a think tank. That's what a think tank's about, the debate of how you're doing things, so on and so forth. And if you're not understanding all the nuances, you may think that it's chaos. Um, and that would be in any think tank or any organization. You would worry about looking behind the curtain. Um, but as Nelson, we always come back to no. Let's just let them come because Nelson always said the truth will set you free, and if you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember your lies. That was another great comment that he always made. So those are the three types of people that attend the conference.
That's excellent. Okay, so Becca, thank you for joining us at super short notice this morning. I wanted to be able to let you guys talk about the think tank. Can you talk about how long you've been a practitioner? I think this was your second time going, but can you just kind of share your experience with the think tank in general?
Yeah, you bet. So this is actually my third time to
Awesome.
go. Been a practitioner for about 2 years. I got my certificate at the very first think tank I ever went to, and I always feel like it's just kind of a breath of fresh air because in this industry, the life insurance industry, it can be very cutthroat. I mean, from past experience, I've seen this, right? And then you come to something like the think tank, and it's completely different. It's such an atmosphere of how do we help each other? How do we share what we've learned? How do we build each other up? How do we encourage, uplift, all those kinds of things? And I was a little bit taken off guard, I think, the first time I went because I really wasn't expecting that. I mean, people say that, right? But that really was the case. And so it's always great to go and this, like Bruce said, there's a variety of perspectives that's given from the stage, and not everyone always agrees. But I think that that's a great place to start, and even having conversations with fellow practitioners in the break times. I think this year there was intentionally a longer time between speakers so that you could have that interaction and have those discussions. And I feel like I get as much out of those types of interactions than I do, or as I do from the actual speakers. So it's a time to challenge your thinking, to rethink your thinking, to combat that arrival syndrome. I feel like I've gone through all these different phases of, oh, okay, I've got this. Oh no, I don't. Okay, I've got this. Oh no, I've got to think about it differently. So you're constantly trying to improve your own knowledge, as well as, like Bruce said, how do I present this to a client in a simple way that's absolutely telling the truth, that's not sensationalized. One of the speakers said that all progress begins with telling the truth, and I love that because like Bruce was saying, you don't have to remember what you said or make it look better than it is, because it's absolutely able to stand on its own. And so it's just a good time to refocus, be inspired, be encouraged, and hopefully, share what you've learned as well. That iron sharpening iron. So
Mm,
it was great.
that's awesome. So, can you guys share? Fritz is asking a question. Thank you, Fritz, for chiming in and tuning in. He said, "How is the think tank different from the others, in your opinion?" And so, can you guys just speak to Bruce? I know you've been attending a long time. Have you been attending since 2003? I can't remember.
No, I've met Nelson in 2009. So that was my first think tank. And I've attended that. That gave me an opportunity to attend 16 think tanks, but I
Mhm.
actually missed one. So I've only attended 15. I'm probably, I mean, of the people there, I was probably in the top 5% of people as far as times that people have been there.
Mm.
There was one person there that had attended every single think tank. Um,
Wow.
and so, and I don't even know the person. I've never met him. And it's kind of a wild, it's a whirlwind tour for everybody, but it's really a whirlwind tour for the advisory council, because everybody wants to talk to you and so on and so forth. So it's amazing. I mean, Beck and I didn't really even talk very much the entire time. Um, but this is great. This is a great question by Fritz. So since 2009, what I've noticed is we've moved away from what I would call like an industry conference, where you just go and you listen to the industry speakers just trying to show you how smart they are, and look at me, look how this is my system, and there's some false modesty. I've always been intrigued by what I think is false modest
Modesty.
modesty. Thank you, Rachel. My mouth isn't working very well
That's
today.
okay.
And because and I'm not even talking about this industry, I'm talking about every industry where a person says, well, I don't know if this is any good. You don't have to do it my way, blah blah blah, but this is the way I do it. Well, I'm like, well, first of all, we know it's good, or you wouldn't be up there speaking. I I I'm impressed by your humbleness, but I'm also now depressed by the fact that you don't have the confidence to say, hey, this is what I'm doing.
And it
And
works.
and it works,
Yeah.
and that's the way it was and we would just pack them in, speaker after speaker after speaker. And David Stearns, who's the president of the Nelson Nash Institute, is an ex-Army guy. And, he stayed on schedule, and, he got people out of breaks right away. And it's like, let's get in. But the breaks were only 10 minutes to go to the bathroom and then get back, and let's listen and listen and listen and listen and listen. And then when the advisory board came about a couple of years ago, we said, hey, we've got to relax a little bit, because some of the best stuff happens at breakfast when you're at a table, at lunch. And if we can make the breaks a little bigger, then I think that would also help people connect during the breaks, right after a talk, and then talk about that talk when it's fresh. And so it's been about 5 years ago, we actually started doing longer breaks. So instead of 10, we would do 20-minute breaks. And the experiment kind of worked. And then last year, we decided to do even longer lunch breaks, and it seemed to go well. And then we survey people, and the surveys were overwhelmingly that they wish that there was more time just to have conversation. Well, then we had a
Bruce,
discussion.
what I'm hearing for the listener who's maybe not in that environment specifically is what I'm hearing from like looking with outsider perspective is that there's more of a mastermind concept, and a sharing of ideas, maybe a sharing of um, thoughts. And what's really amazing about that is that it's true that whenever you get into a room or a place where other people are having similar goals, you're going to have common ground, and you're going to have things that you're going to learn from them and they're going to learn from you. And I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is that there's more of this, like we're all making each other better because of this camaraderie, this thought sharing that's happening at the think tank.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good synopsis. The only thing I would say is, I don't think there was, when it was more of just a lecture type series, there still was the attitude we're making each other better.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that now we're intentional with it. So now we actually have much longer breaks. And during the breaks, we're intentional about having specific topics that people can go to a certain area of the room and just have an informal discussion with that particular person.
Mm.
And that was very well received this year. But last year, we started at the end something we call the connection zone. So you could actually stay over for a half a day last year and connect in small groups to share amongst the small groups with the participants, and the people that were speakers, or they have been really long-term practitioners, didn't really have a topic that they wanted to get across, but they're facilitators. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you want to talk about? And then bounce around those ideas. Last
So
year, it was added. You could sign up for that additional. This year we said it was so valuable. The feedback was it was so
mm,
valuable. We just made it part of the conference. And it was good last year, but it was the first year doing it. This year, I thought it was very, very good. And so we're going to continue that. And actually, on our debriefing, this is hot off the presses. On our debriefing after the conference with the board, is we're going to consider actually doing that within the conference in shorter periods of time.
oh, nice.
So in other words, the first day you might have a couple speakers, and then we're actually going to get together in connection zone and right away discuss the topics right there, and then have some more speakers, do the connection zone, discuss the topics, and so on and so forth.
So
Like I
Bruce,
said,
can you guys share a little bit, like, that's really beautiful how that's happening. What are some of those topics that are coming up that might be most relevant to somebody who's saying, look, I want to do infinite banking. I want to make sure I'm working with the right people. I want to make sure I understand this really well. I want to make sure that I'm doing the best thing for my family. I don't want to get sidetracked in what you're saying, kind of the Wild West, or get misled even by some of the marketing or the hot flashy things that sound like they're, buzzwords. What are some of the things that that person who's trying to make actual decisions about what's best for their financial life, what are some of the topics that are coming up at the think tank that would be most meaningful to them to understand, that relate to that person who's trying to make the best financial choices?
yeah, I think the first of all, if you don't just go to the basically five tenets of Nelson Nash, if you think about those first, like think long range. So if you have somebody that is saying, "Oh, well, you only have to pay premiums, or worse, you only have to make deposits for 4 years, and then you don't have to make any more deposits." That's not thinking long range. If you're saying, don't be afraid to capitalize, and this comes up a lot of times. Well, I heard you only should put like 10% of your money into the base policy, because what if I can't do it next year? Well, that's being afraid to capitalize, because as Nelson says, and this may be the most important point we talk about today, is when people are afraid that they might not be able to make their premium payment, that's because they see it as a payment, or they see it as an investment. Oh my God, I don't know if I continue to make that investment. What they don't see is money flows in the banking system for you all the time anyway. All you're doing is changing your habits, and you're going to flow it here first, and then you're going to use it from there. So they don't understand. So this whole thing about this very small base policy, because what if I can't make it? You're afraid to capitalize. Okay. So that's another topic that comes up all the time. Policy design. What's so wrong with doing a small base policy? So that's the second one. Uh, don't steal the peas. So there are people that will say, "Oh, you should pay back the loans, but don't worry about it." Now, legally, I say that too, but once again, I explain that to people. Okay, you're not obligated to pay back the loans. However, it's in your best interest to pay back the loans, because now you have more capital to actually do something with in the future. If you don't have that good habit of paying back, you're not going to have that capital to either capture an opportunity or then use it to finance things that you're going to purchase throughout your lifetime. So that's number three topic that does come up. Number four is don't do business with banks. And what's interesting about this one is there are a lot of people, including unfortunately some practitioners, that don't see this the way that Nelson saw it. Nelson absolutely hated banks. Okay, absolutely hated them. He called them snakes and dragons, and because he saw that the financing was putting so much stress on people's lives. Well, there are people out there that are actually telling people to get a HELOC and actually pay their premiums with the HELOC. And so you're actually starting a relationship with the bank to actually start your banking system. And there are people even worse that are telling you to go get a credit card with a cash advance and start the premium payment with the cash advance from a credit card, which is even well, I can't even talk about that one. It makes my blood pressure go up. So that's
That was
the
the
next one.
fourth.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fourth.
that was don't do business with banks
And then
principle.
the fifth one is probably the most important one, and it's about rethinking your thinking. and about,
Becca, you just said that a minute ago.
yeah, it's about why do you think the way you think? And I'm not even talking about with just banks, but why are you thinking, well, whole life is a terrible investment? Well, we agree with you because it's not an investment. So why do you think that way? And that encouraging the not only the practitioners but the general public to rethink why they think that way and why they can't get over that fact that they're constantly comparing it to an investment when it's not. You should be comparing it to the banking function of your life. So those are some of the topics that come up in the situation.
Yeah, Becca, what would you add to that, or maybe say to the person who is wondering, really, what about the think tank is most helpful for me to understand in terms
Mhm.
of what conversations are being had around infinite banking, so that I, the consumer, can be able to know who to trust, who to follow, what advice to take, how to make decisions. What would you say about that?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that came up a lot for me was this making sure you're differentiating between the process and the product.
Mhm.
Because I know when I first got started, I was all excited about, oh, look what this whole life policy can do for you. And that's what I wanted to talk about. But they're really two separate things, right? So you have the process of IBC, which is basically just saving, borrowing, and repaying with interest. I mean, you could do that with a coffee can, right? You can do that with a HELOC. You could do that with a credit card, but those aren't all very favorable environments. So, so the process is about your behavior, but then you need to put that good behavior in the best environment possible. And so what Nelson would, what he found and what we agree with is that the very most efficient and favorable environment in which to practice that process is a dividend paying whole life policy from a mutual company. And so to me, I think kind of separating those things in your mind is helpful because it's not all about like, oh well, all the rate of return in a whole life policy. No, it's about your behavior and it's about the environment that you're going to put your money into. And those two combined, when you have good behavior in the most favorable environment, you can have amazing results. And I think it's really that simple. And it doesn't have to be about all the how all the riders work and this and that's good to know. I'm the type of person I wanted to know all the things, right? Even when I was just getting started. But I think really just like Bruce was saying, bringing it back to simple. Like this is so simple. This is so simple. I loved somebody told a story about Nelson that I had never heard, about a radio interview that he did, and the host of the radio show was asking him all about IBC, and it sounded amazing, all these things he was saying, and she gets to the end and she's like, well, Nelson, what would you say are what's the downside? I mean, this sounds like there's tons of benefits. What's the downside of practicing IBC? And Nelson thought for a minute and he said, not participating. Like, there you go, right there. I thought that was such a great story.
That's awesome. I think it's really relevant for somebody who is thinking about, how do I make the best financial choices? And I think sometimes we can even conceptualize. I mean, I was just thinking the other day how we can think of infinite banking as a piece of your entire financial picture. But really, when you think about it, you can rethink all of your financial thinking in terms of, how am I using and flowing money through my financial life, which infinite
Mhm.
banking can be that entire structure of the system of the flow of the money inside your life. And if you're utilizing a process to, instead of store money in the banks, pay them interest for
Mhm.
borrowing from them, because they're in control and they, the banks, have the capital and they are in charge. Instead of doing that, if we can flow that money into our own life over here, where
Mhm.
we are in control, we have the capital and we have the ability for that money to grow. Now we can take advantage of borrowing against that capital and repaying, and we've captured those dollars in that reservoir, or that holding tank that can continue to grow and grow and grow in our financial life. And so instead of always through every transaction that we make and every loan that we take from the banking institutions and paying interest there, we're instead building up this ongoing, growing pool of capital that not only is growing through dividends and interest, but also is having this ability to have this generational overflow into the next generation when we pass away with that death benefit. So there's just so much about that is a more favorable environment. And that doesn't negate the idea of investing. I mean, you still would invest, right? So you still would borrow against capital. You'd put those dollars to work in investments because you want to be in a position where you're utilizing all of the advantages that happen in your financial life, but you're not thinking of it as, well, here's my insurance money, here's my investment money, and here's my regular life. Instead, infinite banking can be the umbrella or the house under which you do all of that. I mean, what would you guys say to that particular concept?
Well, I'll quote Jeff Jesse, one of our other advisors here. He always says that banking's either happening to you or for you. And if you can't tell me how it's happening for you, then it's happening to you. Like you have to be intentional, right, to change that flow of money in a way that benefits you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we often overlook that there is a cost of money. Like we get like, okay, I know that if I borrow money from the bank or whoever else, I'm going to pay them interest. But often we overlook that if I pay cash for something, I'm not only, if I buy a Coke for $1, I'm not only giving up that dollar, but I'm giving up every dollar that dollar could have made for the rest of my life. There is a cost to that. And so I think what this process of infinite banking does is allows you to capture that opportunity cost that was otherwise just gone forever.
That's very good, Becca, because I think if the cost of capital is one of the main ideas that people need to understand in order to rethink their thinking on whether this is something that not I'm convinced it's good for everybody. But if people don't understand and change their habits, it's not going to be good for them. Because I often say, and this is why I do not particularly like when people are promoting this as a way to get out of debt. Because what ends up happening is, oh yeah, okay, I get the cost of capital, so I want to get uninterrupted compounding, so I'm going to use a dividend paying whole life insurance policy, and I'm going to make my premium payment. Then I'm going to borrow against my cash value, and then I'm going to pay my debt off. And then the amount of money I was paying my debt, I'm going to pay it back to the policy. And I think there's probably people that come into debt that's not a bad habit for them. That's not why they got the debt. Maybe there was like a bad medical situation. Maybe mom and dad needed additional care. Maybe a child needed additional medical care. Maybe you had something go wrong from a natural disaster on your house, and it didn't, all get paid for by insurance. There are specific things that cause people to get into debt unintentionally. But for people that have two car payments and their total payments are $2,000 a month, and people have $50,000 on a credit card, and people have $110,000 on student loans, and people have furniture loans, and they have Home Depot loans because they went out and bought something on a credit card from Home Depot. And those people are hurting. And I understand they're hurting. And then to try to tell them, well, the way that we can get you to not to be hurting is to actually have another payment that you're required to do, which would be a premium payment to a life insurance company. And then, oh, by the way, then we'll borrow against it. But we can't, in the early years, we can't borrow against all the money because there's some lack of liquidity in the first year. So now you can't get out of it as fast. And so I really believe that when people are pushing that part, that is something that they don't understand the 5 tenets of infinite banking that Nelson set up for. So that would be the follow up to that part. The other thing I think that the think tank actually helps people do is it helps the people that are 100% Nelson Nash. We're going to follow Nelson until the day we die, and 100% of his. And the people that think they put a little twist that's going to be better on it. And so it kind of challenges the original thinking. Now, I'm still in the camp where the original thinking is about as good as you can get. But because of 7702 law changes and because of changes in mortality, changes in the way that the insurance companies do business, there may be some slight design changes now that Nelson couldn't do way back then when he wrote the book. That it's good dialogue to talk about what is good and what is probably still not good, and what we should experiment with and see if it helps people. And then the final thing I would like to say that comes out of the think tank is social media is still touting that, yeah, Nelson had a great concept, but he was way out of touch. You shouldn't be using whole life. You should be using index universal life. And I've been doing this for a long time. I heard this about universal life. I heard about variable universal life. And I heard it about index universal life. And this was something that came up at the think tank. And I said, and it just hit me. And I don't know if this is a good analogy or not, but it was good in my table. So when universal life came out, it was like, okay, whole life is good, but it doesn't provide enough growth. So interest rates are so high. Let's do it with universal life. And then universal life, interest rates came down. There's no guarantees in that universal life. So everything came crashing down. So then they said, oh, well, it wasn't so much the concept, but now we have a better product. That product wasn't as good. Now we figured out a better product. So they came up with variable universal life because the stock market was taking off. But then they said all you had to do is minimally fund it, and the stock market will take care of the rest of the funding. But then the stock market crashed several times, and guess what? The minimum funding wasn't enough to keep it going, and those crashed. Well, we got a better product now. The concept's still good to use universal life. Now we have indexed universal life. We figured it out. And it hit me sitting at a table telling that story that it's kind of like socialism. It's like, well, socialism isn't being done properly. Now we have better socialism. So we're going to do it now this way. And then that one didn't work. So, well, now we have democratic socialism. Now, whatever the heck that is. So we keep reinventing socialism to try to say, well, all that other socialism didn't work. We finally figured it out. And it's the same way with universal life, especially for banking purposes.
That's a good analogy, Bruce. I think it's funny that, I mean, basically the concept that you're saying is, here's the thing that works. Well, let's try to reinvent it. Oh, that doesn't work. So we need to reinvent the reinvention. So that didn't work. Let's reinvent the reinvention. Well, why don't we just go back to the source? That would be a much better idea. So
we could just go back to the product that's been profitable every year for over 200 years, right? I mean,
yeah,
that
exactly.
seems to be a pretty sure bet.
I think the reason that, I mean, in all honesty, I think the reason that people turn to another product is because, well, they think whole life insurance somehow isn't competitive enough. It's not growing fast enough. It's not, I don't know, it's losing out on some, whole life's got FOMO because the market's doing cool stuff or the interest rates are doing cool stuff. So we got to go grab something else over here because it's not exciting enough. And I think the challenge is that, I mean, if you talk to anyone who's been successful in sustainable business, there's not any such thing as a get rich quick scheme that's going to hold for long term. There's no way that you can go around principles and expect things to last. And every person who's ever looking for those, flashy, one-time shot, the silver bullet, the thing that they're going to just keep seeking. They're going to find one silver bullet and that one's going to fail them. And they're going to look for another silver bullet. That one's going to fail them. The people who are really successful are the ones who go back to the old truths, the hard work, the understanding that you're going to have to do things right, treat people right, and that you're going to have these principles that are foundational to your work. And I love, actually, Russell Brunson is the one who first brought that out. And you might know of him. He's in the ClickFunnels community. He's created ClickFunnels, and it's really amazing to recognize that as much as you have really exciting things that are happening, all of the true sustainable growth comes back to those solid principles. And it's the same way in finance.
Now, the last thing I would kind of touch on is there is a certain person out there in social media land that touts these very small base policies, which violates the think long term and don't be afraid to capitalize mentality. This person was actually asked to leave the Nelson Nash Institute because he violated these properties. And he says that there's only 4 companies, what he calls the big 4, that you should do business with. And that would be Northwestern Mutual, Guardian, Mass Mutual, and New York Life. Not one of those companies actually supports the Nelson Nash Institute. And one of them actually came out with a letter several years, which we've done a podcast on, to say that anybody that does this will actually be terminated with their appointment. But what's interesting, that company also,
Meaning the practitioner, the life insurance producer selling policies using infinite banking,
correct. And I just want to
terminating
clarify,
that appointment.
anybody, whether they're a practitioner or not.
I'm sorry. I mean the insurance person, not the consumer who purchased the policy, not the policy owner, but we're talking about the agent.
Correct.
Sorry.
And so I'd like to champion up the companies that are actually supporting the Nelson Nash Institute, and that would be Lafayette Life, that would be One America, Ameritas, Equitable Life out of Canada, Mutual Trust Life. I think I got them all back.
I think Penn Mutual was there this year as well.
No, not, I mean, technically not. That was actually
Okay.
a distribution arm of them, like an
Okay.
IMO arm of them. And so, and that's the first year that they've had any kind of representation. So I'm a little skeptical about whether they're really into it or not. So now, those companies, because of their legal teams, they do not formally actually champion the process, because as they said on the panel that we had with them, is that they don't endorse any kind of way to present their products. So whether it's, there's like Circle of Wealth, whether there's Truth Concepts, whether there's the LEAP system. So that was the first time that I heard a good explanation of why they don't, come out with emails, or why. Oh, Security Mutual Life was another one, Becca, that was there that I didn't mention. Why they don't come out and champion it. But I do think we need to recognize those companies. I'm still not saying you can't do it with those other companies. I'm not. And there's a couple of other mutual companies you could do it with, but once again, they don't support the Institute. So you got to ask yourself, why aren't they supporting the Institute? And this is what I want consumers to understand is, yes, it really doesn't matter which company that you do business with, because they're all highly rated. They're all using the same actuarial tables. So don't try to figure out, oh, should I do business with this company or this company? You just need to do business with somebody else rather than the banks. So that's something else that's come out the last few years in the think tank, is kind of an insurance industry panel to actually help the Nelson Nash Institute with the development of the concept to the general public.
I love that the Nelson Nash Institute is so committed to ongoing growth and making sure that we become better as producers, as communicators, as consumers of the product of life insurance ourselves, because we don't just talk about something, we're also using it and paying premiums ourselves and funding policies and building our infinite banking system, our family banking systems in our own lives. And so I just love that the think tank and the Nelson Nash Institute and all of the initiatives that come out from that organization are so positive towards this idea of really becoming your own banker, taking that banking function, being in a position of control, and having access to capital that just really sets somebody head and shoulders above, I guess maybe not over other people, but over what they could do without infinite banking.
Absolutely.
So thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you for both going to the Nelson Nash think tank, and thank you for bringing these concepts back to our audience here at the Money Advantage. So if you are listening and you are wondering more about the infinite banking concept, or you're wanting to understand how it works, you're wanting to understand what you can do to put yourself in a position of figuring out where can I find premium dollars? How can I fund a policy or fund an additional policy? How can I continue directing more of my income into infinite banking so that I can build up this banking system, not just today, but for years to come, so that I have more to go into the next generation, so that I'm setting my kids and my grandkids up to be able to start from where I left off instead of making them have to start over with thinking about all of these things in their own life. If you are wanting to be at the helm of making those decisions in your family that will absolutely put the trajectory of your entire family for the next generations to come in a better position, then come talk to us. You can book a call at The Money Advantage. You can get on our advisor's calendar. And this is just an opportunity to explore what exactly that looks like for you with your financial picture, your income, your assets, your goals, your timetable, your cash flow, your where your thinking is at and what your capabilities are now, so that you can absolutely put yourself in a position of strength and certainty and stability for years to come. So we encourage you to do that. Book that call at themoneyadvantage.com. We would be honored to be able to be part of that journey with you. So in closing, thank you for listening. Please remember, success leaves clues. So model the successful few, not the crowd, and build a life and business you love. We'll see you next time.